This is Kathleen Myatt reporting live from Attawapiskat First Nation, here to talk to you about the effects of poverty on communities like these. Poverty is rapidly increasing in First Nation communities across Canada. In fact, First Nations people are the most underemployed ethnic group in Canada. The rampant poverty among First Nation communities in Canada is crippling them. It is devastating their social well-being, physical, and mental health. Although there are various effects of poverty among First Nations people in Canada, some of the most detrimental affect their physical health, social well-being, and finally, their mental health. Among various things that poverty affects, physical health is paramount. Poverty impacts housing, food, and life expectancy. One issue that is extremely alarming is the condition of the houses First Nations people are living in. I have a quote here. Half of First Nations adults in First Nations communities reported the presence of mold or mildew in their homes, and this has increased over time. That's from Health Canada. The presence of mold and mildew in houses can cause serious health side effects. According to recent studies, prolonged exposure to high levels of these harmful agents can reduce lung function and cause chronic health problems such as asthma. In addition, individuals who already suffer from asthma or allergies are more likely to have severe symptoms when exposed. Another very common repercussion of poverty that affects individuals' physical health is food insecurity. I have another quote. In 2008 to 2010, 54% of First Nations on-reserve households reported being either moderately or severely food insecure. That's from the Chief of Public Health. Studies have recently confirmed that 40% of First Nations households are moderately food insecure, and 14% are severely food insecure. The households that are food insecure only have access to unhealthy foods because they, financially, can't afford healthy foods. Therefore, these households don't have enough food to begin with, and the food they do have does not nourish them the way our body needs in order to be physically healthy. Another appalling ramification of poverty on physical health is how much it can reduce life expectancy of a community. I have another quote. In 2017, the life expectancy for the total Canadian population is projected to be 79 years for men and 83 years for women. First Nations populations have lower life expectancies at 73 to 74 years for men and 78 to 80 years for women. That's again from Health Canada. This lowered life expectancy among First Nations individuals can be assumed as a terrible consequence of poverty. The combination of poor living conditions and food insecurity among First Nations people is certainly a large contributor to their lowered life expectancy. First Nations people are living in terrible conditions with unhealthy and hardly enough food to survive. These horrible conditions are devastating to our physical health, which is causing a lowered life expectancy. We are now going to take you on a tour to see the deplorable conditions.
There's no electricity to this house then?
Just extension.
Just an extension from the house to the shack. Just to confirm, so there's the two grandparents, a little granddaughter, and no running water, no toilet. You have to use a bucket for the ditches. That's the situation here?
Yes.
Yes.
She's 80 years old.
80 and 85. Wow. And the little girl's in grade 5. So who lives there? Okay. Living in this shed here. No running water? No nothing. So people living in these shacks?
Yeah.
No running water here? So then the toilet pails are all half dumped out?
Yes.
Out in the road?
Yes.
How many people are living here?
One single, and one single.
Single there, and the little girl and the grandparents.
Yeah.
So there's how many here without sewage and water, just in this little circle, 6 or 8?
There's 7 kids and 2 adults.
7 kids and 2 adults?
Yeah.
Do they have water in there?
No.
No?
You just dump it in the ditch.
They just dump their waste in the ditch. 7 kids, two adults in that home. So that's about 15 people right here.
Wow, okay. Another detrimental repercussion of poverty among First Nations people is the decreased social well-being. Poverty affects living arrangements for both children and parents and is also a cause of spousal violence. As a result of poverty, children are unable to survive in the horrible living conditions on the reserve. I have a quote from Heather Schofield. These families lack the basics of life in the north: running water, plumbing, insulation, and proper heating. These terrible living conditions are causing families to send children to live elsewhere because the living conditions are so horrible. They likely wouldn't survive. Another result of poverty is causing significant issues for First Nations people, and that is the lack of employment on the reserve. I have another quote. Even before the 2008 to 2009 recession, Aboriginal people had a harder time finding work and faced higher unemployment than non-Aboriginal people. That's from Statistics Canada. As a result of this, First Nations people who are looking for work are more likely to move outside of the reserve in order to find a job. However, often, when one parent does this, the rest of the family stays on the reserve because they have a strong connection with the community that they are a part of. Situations like these are extremely common in First Nations communities, and these are a direct result of poverty. Based on all of this information, one could definitely understand that these people are under a great deal of stress, which often brings out the worst in people. In some alarming cases, this might result in spousal violence. I have another quote. 9% of Indigenous respondents said that they were victims of spousal violence in 2014. That's more than double the number of non-Indigenous people, which was 4%, who reported family violence in those years. That's from Jesse Ferris. This increased rate of spousal violence in First Nations people versus non-First Nation Canadians can be linked directly to the increased poverty rate for First Nations people versus non-First Nation Canadians. The combination of unusual living arrangements for both children and adults, along with increased rates of spousal abuse among First Nation communities, all contribute to the decreased social well-being among First Nations. A final repercussion of poverty among First Nations communities is increased mental health problems. Poverty can result in socioeconomic stress, increased suicide rates, and lack of access to proper help due to financial issues. The first contributor to the very dangerous mental health problems among First Nations people is socioeconomics related stress. I have a quote. The 2008 to 2010 First Nations Regional Health Survey, RHS, found that approximately half of on-reserve First Nations people experience moderate to high levels of psychological distress. Comparatively, only 1/3 of the general population experiences similar levels of psychological distress. The results of the RHS indicated that factors such as socioeconomic status were risk factors for psychological distress. That's from Nora Keeland. This elevated level of socioeconomic stress among First Nations people is directly related to the elevated level of poverty among the First Nations people. As so many First Nations people suffer from financial distress, they experience high amounts of stress that can be detrimental to individuals' mental health and well-being. Another horrifying result of mental health issues as a result of poverty is the increased suicide rates in many First Nations communities. I have another quote. For the First Nations population, suicide rates are twice the national average and show no signs of decreasing. However, these rates differ from community to community. Some communities have had epidemics of suicide. That's from Sam and Can. These elevated suicide rates are a direct response to the poverty among First Nation communities. The lack of opportunities in First Nations communities leaves individuals feeling depressed, which leads to many deaths by suicide. An example of this is in this community right here at Attawapiskat, where the community once suffered 11 deaths by suicide in one winter. In an effort to break this terrible cycle, the community received funding for a new hockey arena. The community is now being scrutinized that they built a hockey arena when the community is in a housing crisis. What these judgmental people don't know is how terribly the community is affected by this many deaths. And if a hockey arena can reduce this number even a little, it's worth every penny. Even with these horrifying statistics, First Nations people are not able to access the type of help they need because they are not financially realistic. I have another quote. Unfortunately, we are falling flat when it comes to mental health treatment. We've decided that only the rich and prosperous can have access to therapy. That's from Chris Curry. Unlike physical injuries, specialized treatment for mental health issues are not covered by OHIP. Basic care is provided. However, the treatment that is required to actually leave an impact on an individual is thousands of dollars, which is not realistic for individuals living in such financial insecurity. The combination of socioeconomic related stress, increased suicide rates, and the lack of access to proper help due to financial issues result in increased suicide rates and mental health problems among First Nations people. Here now are some residents to talk to you about the recent suicide crisis.
You tell the youth that you love them, you care about them. We need you. We love you.
Ottawa was declared a state of emergency on April 9 because of the suicide epidemic that we were facing in our community. In one day, we had 20 suicide attempts. And that's why we declared a state of emergency, because we're crying out for help.
Sheridan's death should not be in faith, and her pain should save our people to bring change. I was really honored to hear that there was like a state of emergency, because there was a lot of crisis going on here at the same time. It was too late because I lost my baby.
The young people need a youth center and just a place to go to have fun.
There could be a lot of things that trigger suicide. We lack housing, infrastructure, water.
It comes from more than one spot. It comes from family problems and bullying, name calling.
And I remember my daughter said, Mommy, I don't want to go back to school, because the teacher was calling me fat and stupid.
The government provided help for us for 1 month. But I'm kind of worried about what's going to take place after 30 days. What I'm looking for as a chief is a long-term commitment.
People portray the negative stuff. What about the beauty? What about the beauty of it? What about the resilience? What we came through? We're still here. We're still here. And we are strong people.
Sheridan was one of my favorite, best childhood cousins as growing up. I struggle with suicide attempts too, but I know that I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stay strong.
A lot of our kids that are trying to commit suicide are our future leaders, our future nurses, our future police, our future doctors, our future chiefs,
In conclusion, the rampant poverty among First Nation communities in Canada is crippling them. It is devastating their social well-being, physical, and mental health. We all need to band together if we want to make a change.